Part 1, A Boy with a Dream. Abraham Lincoln was born on a cold winter morning, February 12, 1809, in a small log cabin in the woods of Kentucky. His family was very poor. They lived far from the town, in the middle of the forest. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked as a farmer and carpenter. He built houses and grew food. His mother, Nancy, was kind and gentle. She took care of the children and taught them about good behavior and hard work. Abraham was the second child. He had one sister, Sarah. Their life was not easy. Every day was full of hard work. There were no shops nearby, no cars, no electricity. Everything had to be made by hand. They grew their own food, built their own home, and made their own clothes. Abraham learned to use an axe before he was even a teenager. He helped his father cut trees and build fences. Life was tough, but Abraham was strong. Even though he worked hard on the farm, Abraham was different from other boys. He loved to learn. There was no regular school nearby, and Abraham only went to school for a few months in total. But he wanted to read, and he wanted to understand the world. So he taught himself. He borrowed books from neighbors, and he read them again and again by the firelight at night. Sometimes, he even walked many miles just to borrow one book. He read the Bible, books of poetry, books about history, and even books about science. He loved the story of George Washington, the first President of the United States. That story made a deep impression on him. It made him think about being honest, brave, and helping his country. He also read Aesop's fables, which taught lessons about life. Even though he had no teacher, Abraham became very smart because he worked hard to educate himself. People started to notice him. He was tall, quiet, and always honest. In fact, he became known as Honest Abe. That was his nickname. There's a famous story about him when he worked at a small shop. One day, he gave the wrong change to a woman. He realized his mistake later that evening, so he walked several miles to return just a few cents. He didn't want to keep money that wasn't his. People respected that. He always tried to do the right thing, even when it was hard. But life became even harder when Abraham was only 9 years old. His mother, Nancy, became very sick. She had a terrible illness called milk sickness, which came from drinking milk from cows that ate poisonous plants. There were no doctors nearby who could help. Nancy died, and young Abraham was heartbroken. Losing his mother was the saddest moment of his young life. He felt alone. For many months, he didn't smile. He missed her love, her care, and her warm voice reading stories to him. Some time later, his father married a kind woman named Sarah Bush Johnston. She was a widow, meaning her first husband had died, and she had 3 children of her own. But she accepted Abraham and his sister as her own children. She saw that Abraham was bright and full of potential. She encouraged his reading and learning. She brought books into the home and gave him support. Abraham loved her deeply and later said she was one of the best things that ever happened to him. As Abraham grew older, his love for learning continued. He was tall, very tall, and strong. He could lift heavy logs and do the hardest jobs on the farm. But he was also gentle, with a quiet voice and kind eyes. He made friends easily and listened more than he spoke. He had a deep sense of fairness. He didn't like to see people treated badly, and he often stood up for the weak or the poor. When he became a young man, Abraham worked many different jobs. He worked as a rail splitter, cutting wood to make fences. He worked on a boat that carried goods down the Mississippi River. He worked in a small store as a clerk, where he sold food and supplies. He also worked as a postman. People trusted him with their letters and money because they knew he would never steal or lie. But he wanted something more. He wanted to help people, not just with tools and muscles, but with ideas. He wanted to speak, to lead, and to make things better. That is when he began to study law. He did not go to law school. He read law books by himself, every night after work. He studied and practiced until he passed the exam and became a lawyer. It was an amazing success for a boy who had only 1 year of school in his life. In 1832, he tried to run for public office, but he lost. Still, he didn't give up. He continued to study and work hard. A few years later, people elected him to the Illinois state government. He began to make speeches and share his ideas. He talked about fairness, freedom, and honesty. People liked him because he was simple, clear, and sincere. He also met a woman named Mary Todd. She came from a rich and important family. She was smart, confident, and full of energy. Many people were surprised that Mary chose Abraham, who was poor and from the countryside. But she saw his great heart and strong mind. They got married in 1842. They had 4 sons together, though sadly, 2 of them died as children. These losses made Abraham and Mary very sad, and life was not always easy. But they stayed together, and Abraham continued his journey. This was just the beginning of Abraham Lincoln's story. The quiet boy from a log cabin was now a lawyer, a husband, and a man who wanted to change the world. In the next part, we'll follow his path as he steps into the world of politics and begins to face one of the greatest challenges in American history, the fight over slavery and the dream of freedom for all. Part 2, The Road to the White House. By the time Abraham Lincoln was in his 30s, he was known across Illinois as a man of honesty, strong ideas, and good speeches. He continued working as a lawyer, traveling from town to help people with their legal problems. People liked him because he was fair. He listened to both sides. He tried to find peaceful solutions. In court, he didn't shout or use big fancy words. He spoke clearly, with kindness and logic. That's why he often won his cases. But something in the country was changing, and Abraham felt it too. In the southern United States, slavery was common. White people forced black men, women, and children to work without pay. Slaves were bought and sold like objects. Abraham thought this was deeply wrong. He believed that every person should be free, no matter their skin color. He began to speak more about slavery. He did not shout. He did not attack others. But he spoke with truth and strength. He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He meant that the country could not live in peace if half of it allowed slavery and the other half did not. Many people agreed with him, especially in the North. But in the South, people became angry. They wanted to keep slavery. They believed Abraham was dangerous. They feared he would take their slaves away. The country was getting ready for a fight, and Abraham was right in the middle of it. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln ran for the United States Senate. His opponent was a man named Stephen Douglas. They had a series of public debates, big meetings where each man spoke about his ideas. Thousands of people came to listen. Lincoln said that slavery was wrong and that America must stop it from spreading. Douglas said that each state should decide for itself. Even though Abraham lost the election, something important happened. His speeches were printed in newspapers all over the country. People who had never heard of him before now knew his name. They called him a strong thinker, a brave speaker, and a man of the people. In 1860, something surprising happened. A new political group called the Republican Party chose Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for president. Many people didn't believe he could win. He was from a small town. He had no fancy education. He wasn't rich. But he had something special, the people trusted him. The election was hard. Many newspapers wrote bad things about him. Some people said he looked strange. Others said he was too simple to lead a country. But others loved him for those same reasons. He was real. He was honest. He understood the pain of the poor and the hope of the common man. In November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the election. He became the 16th President of the United States. People across the North cheered and celebrated. But in the South, the mood was dark. They were angry and afraid. They believed Lincoln would end slavery. Before he even sat down in the White House, 7 Southern states decided to leave the United States. They formed their own country, called the Confederacy. This had never happened before. The United States was breaking apart. When Lincoln gave his first speech as president, he stood on the steps of the Capitol building and said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." He hoped for peace. He hoped the South would return. But soon, the first shots of war were fired. The American Civil War had begun. Lincoln had never been in the army, and now he was the leader of a country at war. The Union, which was the North, wanted to keep the United States together. The Confederacy, which was the South, wanted to be a new country where slavery was legal. The war was long and bloody. Brothers fought against brothers. Towns were burned. Families were torn apart. During these dark years, Lincoln worked day and night. He read reports from the battlefield. He met with generals. He visited soldiers in hospitals. He gave speeches to keep the people strong. But it was not easy. People in the North were tired. They didn't understand why the war was taking so long. Some even said Lincoln should quit. But he stayed calm and focused. He believed in the Union. He believed that slavery must end. He believed that the United States had a future, a better future. In 1863, something historic happened. Abraham Lincoln signed a paper called the Emancipation Proclamation. This paper said that all slaves in the southern states were now free. It did not end slavery completely, not yet. But it was a big step forward. It changed the purpose of the war. Now, the war was not just about saving the Union, it was about freedom. That same year, Lincoln gave one of the most famous speeches in American history. It was called the Gettysburg Address. It was very short, only about 2 minutes, but it was powerful. He said, "All men are created equal." He said that the soldiers who had died did not die in vain. He said that the country must continue their work, so that, government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. His words touched people's hearts. They understood that Lincoln was not just a politician. He was a man with deep love for his country and for all people, no matter their color, no matter their class. As the war continued, Lincoln faced many hard days. But he never gave up. He believed that America could survive, and be better than before. He also never stopped caring for others. One evening, he walked past a group of wounded soldiers. He took off his hat, nodded, and said, "God bless you, boys." The men, though in pain, smiled. They knew their president was one of them. The war was not over yet. But Abraham Lincoln had become the heart of the nation. Part 3, The Price of Freedom. By 1864, the American Civil War had already lasted 3 years. It was a hard time for the country. Thousands of young men had died. Towns were destroyed. Families cried for their lost sons and brothers. The North had more soldiers, more factories, and more money. But the South had strong fighters and great generals. The war seemed endless. Abraham Lincoln, the quiet man from Kentucky, was now older and more tired. The war had taken a toll on him. His face had deep lines. His eyes looked heavy with sadness. But his spirit was still strong. He knew the war had a purpose. He believed that slavery must end, and the country must be one again. In 1864, there was another election. Some people in the North were angry with Lincoln. They said the war was going on too long. They wanted peace, even if it meant letting the South keep slavery. A new candidate ran against Lincoln. His name was George McClellan. He promised to stop the war quickly. But the people still trusted Abraham. They remembered his words. They believed in his heart. When the votes were counted, Lincoln won again. It was a clear message: the country wanted him to finish what he started. That winter, Lincoln spent many hours in his office. He worked on a new idea. He didn't just want to end slavery during the war. He wanted to end it forever, in the law. So, he supported a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution. An amendment is a change to the country's highest law. This new law was called the 13th Amendment. It said that slavery would no longer be legal anywhere in the United States. Not in the South. Not in the North. Not ever again. Some people in Congress said no. But Lincoln worked hard. He spoke to them one by one. He asked for their support. And finally, in January 1865, the law passed. People cheered. There was singing and dancing in the streets. The long fight against slavery was almost over. A few months later, in April 1865, the war itself finally came to an end. The Southern Army, tired and weak, surrendered to the North. The fighting stopped. Guns were silent. Soldiers dropped their weapons and hugged each other. Some even cried. The country could begin to heal. Lincoln was filled with hope. He walked slowly through the city of Washington, D.C. The streets were full of people. Some waved flags. Some rang bells. Everyone was smiling. A black man saw Lincoln pass and took off his hat. He bowed deeply. Lincoln nodded and said, "Don't bow to me. You must bow only to God. You are now free." But even in this moment of joy, danger was near. Not everyone was happy about the war ending. Some people in the South were angry and bitter. One of those men was named John Wilkes Booth. He was an actor who hated Lincoln. He believed that the South had been destroyed by him. He decided to do something terrible. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the war ended, Abraham Lincoln went to the theater with his wife, Mary. The play was a comedy. People were laughing. Lincoln smiled too. For the first time in years, he looked peaceful. While the play was on, Booth walked into the theater. He made his way to the president's private box. Quietly, he opened the door, took out a small gun, and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. Then he jumped down to the stage and shouted, "The South is avenged," and ran away. The theater was full of screams. Mary cried out. Soldiers and doctors rushed to Lincoln's side. But the wound was too serious. They carried him to a nearby house. There, he lay in a small bed, not moving, not speaking. People gathered outside the house all night, waiting for news. They held candles. They prayed. They cried. But there was no hope. In the early morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. He was 56 years old. The news spread across the country like a storm. Cities rang their church bells. Shops closed. Flags were lowered. Even children wept in schools. The president who had saved the Union, who had ended slavery, was gone. His body was placed in a train and taken back to his home state of Illinois. Millions of people came to see the train pass. They threw flowers. They stood in silence. They said goodbye. But though Lincoln was gone, his ideas lived on. The United States stayed together. Slavery was truly over. And Abraham Lincoln was remembered as one of the greatest leaders in history. He had started life in a poor wooden cabin. He had little education. He lost many elections. He suffered deep sadness. But he never gave up. He believed in fairness. He believed in freedom. And most of all, he believed that even ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage, truth, and kindness. Today, his face is on the penny and the $5 bill. His statue stands tall in Washington, D.C., in the Lincoln Memorial. People from all over the world visit it. They stand quietly and remember the man who once said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." That is the story of Abraham Lincoln, a story of struggle, of love for justice, and of a dream that still lives on. Thank you for listening to this story. If you liked it, write about it in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.